So, as we mentioned, today is all sponsored by ReversingLabs Spectra Collective, our open source community with Spectra Assure community, our free tool that offers you to look into what's going on in those open source packages to tell if it has vulnerabilities, malware, tampering, hardening, or licensing issues. And today is all about the number one thing that's on everybody's mind, vibe coding. With us today, I'm very excited to share that we have Bruno Borges of Microsoft, and we have Dustin Lair of Catalyst. So before we get in, I would love for the audience to know a little bit about who you are, what your interest is in today's topic, and get them used to your voice at home. So Bruno, you want to go first?
All right, welcome and yeah, thank you for having me. And hey, Dustin as well. Nice to meet you. Um, Good seeing the audience here. Thank you for joining on this webinar. Yeah, my name is Bruno. I work at Microsoft. I'm a product manager for Java ecosystem and community. But I'm also a vibe coder, and in the past few months, I had quite a good experience building a little tool for myself and other parents at my kids' school. And I had also experienced the some of the bad consequences of vibe coding that was triggered by another person building other tools for parents. And I would love to dig into those topics in today's webcast. Besides that, my role at Microsoft is helping developers engaging with AI and making the most of the technology, but in the right way, and using the right tool um, um, in safe ways that can ensure that the code that they work with generated by AI is code that can go to production. So it's going to be exciting for next hour.
I'm excited you're here because I know the story you're alluding to, and I can't wait to see the comments that come from
Yeah,
this.
yeah.
And also, I think you're selling yourself short, pal. Aren't you a Java champion in the ecosystem?
Yeah. I was recognized as Java champion after I left Oracle and joined Microsoft in 2018, which was kind of funny because lots of folks came to me and said, "Well, weren't you a Java champion before?" I'm like, "No, I was an Oracle employee, and Oracle employees don't get that benefit, that recognition." But as soon as I became a Microsoft employee working with Java, using my Mac, so this is a Mac device that I'm actually on. Uh, um, from Microsoft. So it's a great opportunity to be engaging with the Java ecosystem and developers in general on behalf of Microsoft. So yeah, thank you.
Yeah, thanks for being here. And before we get into it, Dustin, tell us a little bit about yourself.
Yeah, happy to be here. I think it's interesting. So, Bruno, you work for Microsoft and you had some Mac issues this morning. Is that what you're saying? You had a technical issue on your Mac?
Well, I wouldn't blame Mac. I would blame Zoom. I had to reinstall Zoom for some reason, and then basically I had to restart the computer because the installation did not succeed well.
Got
Uh,
it. Okay.
but
Just
yeah,
wanted to check on that.
no worries.
Um, yeah, I'm really looking forward to the conversation. It's great to meet you as well, Bruno. So I was a software engineer for over a decade. I wrote a lot of code, both on the personal side plus professionally. Video games, worked for the DoD for a little while, worked on e-commerce sites for retail, eventually became an app architect. This was at Staples. And then I moved into security. So I was a security architect for a while, and then I've led AppSec programs at large and small companies. Today, I do a lot of consulting for IANs, just for from my own sort of personal LLC. There's a lot of talk about the strategy around security for AI and coding and vibe coding and all of that. So I help companies with that. I also work for a secure code training company, Security Journey, where obviously vibe coding and AI assisted coding is part of what we teach as well. And then I started a company, Catalyst, and we focus on security culture, specifically by building security champions across the organization. I really feel like the more we involve in the topic of security, the better for everyone. So that's kind of my mission, is to bring this, bring more visibility right into the concerns around AI and AI assisted coding. So happy to be here and looking forward to the conversation.
Well, thanks, Dustin. Bruno, thank you both so much. I personally know you both. I've both seen you speak at different, events, and it's always very enlightening when I get to chat with you. So thanks for being here today. Before we dive into the questions I have prepared for you, I want to kind of level set with the audience here, and I want to see where folks are at home with what they're using vibe coding. So I'm going to start off with a poll here today. And the first question is, how often do you find yourself in a vibe coding flow state? Is that daily? Is that weekly? Is it occasionally, rarely, or never? And it's just not your vibe. So I'm going to give it a few seconds to see what people say. I feel
It's
like
a
we need
shame. It's a shame that a host cannot vote. Why can't we vote, Caddy? Right?
I don't know. I think I need to work on that, but what is your vote? Let's do that while we're waiting.
So yeah, I think the interesting thing is, so my role is product management. I was a coder until I don't know 2012, and like full-time developer. Now I even as a PM, I think I became again a full-time developer. It's just that I'm not writing the code myself character by character, but I am architecting software more often than not. And I like this analogy of vibe coding or AI assisted programming, as AI is a junior developer, and experienced developers are shifting more and more into software architecture where AI is becoming the programmer, the developer, just writing the code. So for me, it became daily now.
Oh, wow. That is an interesting shift. I wouldn't have thought so much that it would be like that. Hmm. Well, the survey results are in, kind of like Family Feud style. We had no one for daily. We had 3 for weekly, 2 for occasionally, 2 for never or rarely, and then 4 just don't vibe. So, Dustin, any thoughts on that? Are you shocked by the results?
I'm a little shocked that there aren't more coding daily, at least as attendees to the webinar. I kind of figured that we would have more folks who were doing this more often, especially given my experience out there talking to a lot of people about this. I know a lot of developers that are using AI in their coding daily. So yeah, little surprised at the results.
Okay. So let's talk about this. I think it would be good to level set as just to how we would define vibe coding as well, or if you want to put it AI engineered code. We've heard both things, so I feel like that's a good place to start is what is it? What makes it so appealing? And why are devs craving it right now? Because we are seeing that people do love being in that flow state. What's the draw?
Yeah, I mean, I'll chime in. I think I've kind of started to look at vibe coding from two different angles. One of them is AI assisted coding, which I think is a little bit different than sort of this stereotypical new trend of vibe coding. What I see as what people are talking about in terms of vibe coding is really not trying to understand the details of what's being produced, right? It's more like they're using the prompts for AI assistants to create code and then, essentially creating an app or whatever creative idea that they have, and then publishing that, right? Sticking it out
Mhm.
there into the world without doing all of the due diligence that we as software engineers know that you should probably be doing, right? Testing, reviewing the code, right? Looking at things like performance, maintainability, like ensuring that it is a quality piece of software, security as well, of course. Um, so again, I put it in two different categories, right? There's what I just described, but then there's also AI assisted coding, which is where you have a professional software engineer who is using AI to assist with what they're doing, more like having a junior sort of co-pilot, right? Or working with AI to get ideas, brainstorm things. One of the things that I have found useful, and in again talking to others, I think it helps a lot with writer's block, which I think as a developer, it's the hardest thing to do to start something, right? Like you've got this big task in front of you and you're like, I don't even know necessarily where to begin. How do I architect a solution here? Um, excuse me, what I've found that these AI assistants help with quite a bit is just with that brainstorming phase. How would I get started? What do you suggest in terms of an architecture here? And then taking that output and not just plugging it straight in, but using it to inform the next steps that you're going to take, right? Oh, that sounds pretty good. Let me do a little bit more research on that. Oh, I didn't even think of it that way. That's something that, didn't occur to me. So maybe I could follow up on the results and figure out if that's actually going to be applicable. So again, two different categories,
Yeah.
and I'm sure we can kind of go into the details of both.
Britta, what are your thoughts? I know I've talked to you about this before because we've also started seeing, yes, there's AI assisted coding with software developers, but there's also a group of people who aren't traditionally software developers who are now trying to build apps doing this. So, can you help me understand, a little bit of the appeal for this vibe coding for both groups, given the context Dustin just gave?
Um, I agree with his comment on architecture. I'm using AI to plan basically, right? The software that one wants to build. Um, that is ultimately what a lot of these vibe coding platforms are doing behind the scenes without us even realizing. They have implemented layers on top of the LLM that ultimately will take steps before actually executing what the user asked for. So there is a planning step, there is a project step, there is a phasing step, and then eventually, okay, now let's start writing actual code using all these different agents, an agent for this, an agent for that. So agentic development or vibe coding, behind the scenes, vibe coding is implemented through agentic AI assistant agents, right, at the end of the day. So
Yeah.
if we as developers understand that, we kind of start writing even the prompts the way that that platform will better understand. Just saying like, okay, now build this UI for me that has a button that does this. I mean, the reason usually most platforms get that right to some degree is because they have the engineers behind the platform implemented those layers. But we developers can just go and use Copilot or ChatGPT
Mhm.
or any other basic chat LLM and implement our own vibe coding platform if we actually want to. But I think the most important thing for the user of those platforms is to understand what they actually want, even before asking the AI to do what they want. Sometimes, the users just, I want an interface that does this. Okay, what about behind the scene? What about the data? What about authentication? What about this? What about that? So understanding what they actually want and how they want to architect the software is extremely crucial for the success of any code that will be generated by AI. So I think we are now shifting away from prompt engineering and more into context engineering, where a lot of information now is sitting on these files in a project folder where they are literally used to give context to the
Mhm.
LLM in RAG style. Behind the scenes, it's RAG
Yeah.
basically. That those files are read by the LLM to then interpret what the user is asking for in the chat input. So I think developers can benefit a lot, but it's important that they understand all these layers behind any AI assisted tool so they can maximize the productivity that they can achieve with them.
And just for, my understanding, when you say RAG, can you explain a little bit about what that is? Because I have a feeling some other people may not know what that is.
Retrieval augmented generation, something like that. Maybe
Okay.
Dustin knows better than I do. I'm bad with acronyms.
Yeah, I think that's right. Retrieval augmented something. I'm not sure what the G is, but I'm gonna do a quick Google search here and figure it out.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think it's generation, but basically the idea is,
Generation. Yep,
yeah,
that's it.
the idea is to feed into the LLM files that or content data that will set the context for the user input, and usually that data is associated to the user, is associated to the business context, in enterprise systems that use AI to answer questions about employee data, for example, RAG is implemented in a way that only extracts information from the HR system specific to that employee, so that an employee cannot ask questions about other employees. Like so,
Mm.
there is a scope set in the data before the LLM can actually answer. But basically, the idea is to, okay, how do we enhance all the data set that the LLM has access to expand that data set to information that it was not trained on, and then the user can ask questions. So when we get that principle and apply into AI assisted coding, the idea is to get that context right. You know, this is a Java project, this is a Node project, we are using version X, we are using version Y. You know, don't attempt to upgrade the library X because it's an internal shippable, you know, custom version of whatever library that you're using. Instead of upgrading to the latest from npm or maybe in Central or PyP or whatever repo that the project uses. So the idea is to have these files that set the context right for the LLM, for the AI, for the agentic AI system to work within those boundaries, within those rules and restrictions for that project. So yeah, behind the scenes, it's kind of RAG.
Yeah, and there's a lot of focus on this lately, especially with the invention of MCP, right? Model Context Protocol, right? Which essentially allows an easier standardized interface for data that can actually be brought into these models, which I think is fantastic because, as we know, garbage in, garbage out. And I think
Mhm.
the entire issue with the fact that a lot of these models don't necessarily generate secure code or high quality code is based on the data set, right? How it was actually trained and what data was used to train it. So I like, Bruno, how you're talking about context, because I do like how there's more focus on context. Like, how could you, if you use cursor or whatever it is, right? How could you create something that's effective, right, without the model understanding the code base that you're working with, right? And how it works today and so forth. Um, I want to bring something else up here that I think is important to talk about, and that's that developers have always had assistance in terms of the code that they write. And the reason I bring this up is because I do think, leaders, folks who aren't necessarily technical or think about coding as much or have this experience think that it just sort of comes out of us, right? Like we just know magically all of these things and we just are able to output code, right?
Yeah,
Directly, immediately. Like you
you're an
sit down,
artist.
you just write code as if you're writing a story. And that is just not true, right? There's a lot of Googling, I will admit, right? A lot of Googling happens, a lot of Stack Overflow happens. And I do see AI as sort of another maybe better, enhancement on top of the resources that we've always had when we've coded. So that's really how I like to think about these AI assisted approaches, right? It's a co-pilot. It's like, hey, I have something here that's a resource that's going to help me code more effectively.
That's
There's
a
a
great analogy.
Yeah, there is a comment from one of our attendees here. I'm a dev, but I seriously thought vibe coding was cheating. The attitude is changing quickly. So yeah, vibe or using AI to write code is kind of cheating, but I think it's important to understand what cheating means in the first place. Um, and and let's go back to school. If you're copying and pasting information from a book into an exam, and you don't know what you're copying, yeah, that's cheating.
Yeah.
Because you're just copying the answer into the question and hoping that the grade will be perfect, an A or A plus. Um, but in programming, it's or in school in general now, because students are using AI to do essays and everything. I think the real question is it cheating if what you're doing is and enhancing your time, managing your time better? If you already know the content, if you truly know the content, if you truly know what you're doing, If you feel like I know I can do this thing, it would take me an hour, but I know I can do this thing. And then you decide, you know what, I'm just going to use AI because it's going to take like 2 minutes. And then you review the output. So, maybe it's garbage in, but you review the garbage and it's not garbage out. So,
Yeah.
and you feel like, hey, I know this thing. Yes, this answer is accurate, but I drafted this thing in 2 minutes and I reviewed in five, and now I spent 7 minutes instead of 60 minutes. That's not necessarily cheating. That's optimizing and being productive. So for programmers, what I feel like that would define cheating is if they don't know how to code and they don't know how to do something, and then they just decide to use AI to implement that logic or that algorithm without understanding the algorithm in the first place, because they don't even have if the developer doesn't have the capacity to understand the output, the algorithm that got generated by AI, yeah, then that's kind of cheating. Because, well, you are responsible for the code that you commit into Git, into your source control management system. Doesn't matter if it was AI generated or not. So if you are committing code that you don't understand, you are kind of cheating. But if it's code that you know doesn't matter, and it's not part of your business, mission critical business, then maybe it's not that cheating. It's just being productive as well. And I say this because I write shell scripts using AI to do some internal tests. I don't have the time even to review those shell scripts, but it's just shell scripts, just a utility tool that I built with AI just to run a bunch of commands in a series of tests. Do I really care about that logic? Not really. So, do I feel like I'm cheating? Yeah. Is it bad? No, it's not
Mhm.
bad in that context. But if it's a logic that goes into business critical solution like the back end, and I don't know what that is doing, yeah, then that's cheating. That's bad. So, there are two types of cheating.
I,
Again,
I
context is key on that,
Yeah.
right?
I really like what you're saying because I want to bring something up because we as developers, we will seek, let's just say third-party libraries, like third-party solutions in cases where, it's not business critical, it's not some sort of very heavy, logical piece of code that we need to make sure is right. Um, think about this, right? Like you just need some sort of calendar widget on your front end, right? Like I just need people to be able to pick a date, right? So that I can take the date and do whatever it is that my app does with it. Um, I'm not going to go research all of the details to make an amazing calendar pop-up, little widget. I'm just going to go, there's a nice open source one over there. It seems to work when I take a look at it very quickly. Um, sure, that does what I need. You plug it in, right? Obviously, there's licenses to consider and so forth. But I think we're all guilty of this as developers. Is that cheating, right? You're using code directly that someone else wrote, and you're not necessarily taking the time to fully understand all of the details. It's more like this works, and I just need a little calendar widget. Okay, so I do want to break this perception that, hey, with AI, now we're starting to cheat. I think that we've always taken that approach, right? But you make a good point, Bruno, in terms of if it is a critical piece of logic, it's handling sensitive data, right? You have a responsibility to understand what that code is doing and make sure that it's written in a way that's, not going to mishandle the data or cause other issues.
Yeah, I like the analogy with third-party libraries. It makes total sense. I mean, I had no idea how jQuery worked, but I used a lot in the front end. Now I use AI to generate the front end for me using React, right? Do I understand React? No. Does it really matter for my parenting tool? Not really. It just works. So the code that I care the most for my little tool, for example, is the backend and the integration with payment system and AI and database, because that has one, legal implications, two, cost implications, and three, scalability implications. So those things matter to me from a business perspective, and I want to make sure that they are implemented the right way, and I understand what they are doing, how they're doing, the cost that is produced by them, et cetera, et cetera. When it comes to the UI, all I want is the calendar widget to pop up and say, you have an event tomorrow.
Yeah. So we've talked a lot about what it is, how it's used, the differences between, have we always had assistance? Is it cheating? Again, context is king. But let's talk a little bit about the collaboration between development and security and how we can kind of work together without losing that speed. Because as you both said, this is also essentially a way to help optimize your time, right? As long as you're understanding the code you're putting, you're using, hey, no problem. And again, it's also, is it business critical? So I'd like to start with a poll question, and that's, when you're in the zone, for those of you here at home, and Bruno and Dustin, you can chime in while we're tabulating the results. When you're in the zone, what's the first thing you're most likely to skip? Because, again, you're moving fast, so there are things that are going to get missed sometimes. Is it writing tests? Is it code review? Is it documentation? Or is it security checks?
You
Yeah,
missed one. You missed one option here, which is all of the above.
All of the above.
Yeah,
Go ahead.
when I'm in that flow state, it's a little bit of make it work, So it is possible that you're skipping all of this. You're testing, obviously, like there's the feedback loop of, okay, I'm going to code a little bit, I'm going to run it, I'm going to make sure that it, what I just coded works. Great. But when you're in that state, you're not certainly so documentation is one thing I was going to point out. Like
Yeah.
no, I'm not thinking about documentation. That typically would happen either before the fact if you're in a sort of architecturally heavy, more waterfall situation, or after the fact, because now that you've made it work and gone through some of the prototypes and ideas that you've had and kind of got to a stable solution, now it's time to sort of document it if you think that that's going to be important to communicate it to others. So I would say documentation, but I think Bruno makes a really good point that you're kind of going to skip a lot of these when you're in that creative flow state.
So the funny thing about this question is that the one that I think I would skip the least is documentation. And the reason for that is because as I write documentation in the code, I am helping the LLM to continue to have the right context, the right understanding of what I want to achieve with this project. So when I provide a prompt and I say, hey, now build this thing, and then it does, one of the things that I try to do with documentation is to actually ask the LLM to write the GitHub Copilot instructions file, which is the context file for that project, like Claude.md or I don't know what is the other one, but GitHub Copilot has this instructions file that you put in the .github folder, and that sets context for the AI agent. But it also helps me to have a good README for the project. So again, I set the right context for that project, what it's trying to achieve, what are the goals of that project, how to build, how to compile, how to test, etc., so that the LLM can reuse those commands that are already in the documentation instead of figuring out how to run this project. You don't want the LLM, the AI agent, to always trying to read the folder. Okay, how do I run this thing? Just put that in the documentation, and then the LLM will save a lot of tokens. So not having to understand the project every time you open your IDE or your tool, whatever. So documentation is actually the one that I would, it's least likely for me to skip out of these four. But after that, I would go with code review. Code review is the one that I would skip the most because I'm using AI. AI is my code reviewer, and I am the code reviewer for AI. AI is the code reviewer for me. So it's pair programming at the end of the day. So that is the one that I'm most likely to skip.
I never thought about documentation like that because, like Dustin, I would have thought, documentation would be the first thing to skip. And based on our poll, 42% of respondents said documentation too. But I like your thought process of doing documentation as you go, because that's giving the context to the LLM. So that's really a great way to think about it, and honestly making sure you're not skipping such a crucial step, because to your point about the README files, a lot of folks who are looking at these different projects really base which projects they use based on how good the README file is, as well as the documentation that goes along with it. So that kind of just flipped what I was thinking, on my head.
I also think there are different, when you're in the zone, you might be trying to be in a different state. Like the software could just be in a prototyping state, right? In which case, trying to get all the documentation, correct, more or less may not make sense, right? Because you're just looking to fire something out there rapidly. Whereas if you were maintaining or updating an existing code base, that might be more important. I've certainly taken plenty of time researching the code, right, before jumping in, looking at documentation, even refining documentation before jumping in to an existing system. So I think that needs to be taken into account as well.
Mm. What about, so, we've talked about when people are in the zone, what are they most likely to skip? What do you think, how does this affect security when we're talking about developers being in the flow? They're doing all this great stuff and optimizing, but what about security? Because I do feel like, security checks, again, go a little bit skipped, right? It's something you're probably not thinking about. So again, context is key. Is it like, a high priority business application? But what do you think of the effects that this might have on maybe in an enterprise if they're using some of this, effects on security?
The 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 fact that security is usually one of the last things that developers like to work on in the code. I don't think it changes much with AI, but if they thought about it, it would be one of the first things you could implement with AI, and it would get rid of that and let that later. And as they can progress, security is already built in. So it's a lot easier to shift to the left when you have AI writing the code for you. So I think developers still fear security in general because it complicates the developer experience during the creation of the software. I need to test the app. Now I have to authenticate. I need to test this thing. Well, now I have to have the right role. So it just adds all these layers during the flow of building the software, and that's why developers kind of push security to the last minute, just because they want to be as productive as possible writing the code. So all those security checks don't exist that don't slow them down. Now I have to have a table in the database with all this relationship between this user and the data, and I have to task this way because of the security layer. So I think it still makes it difficult to implement security, implement software with security from the beginning, just because it makes the developer flow, the coding flow, slower by nature of that security layer. But implementing with AI, it's kind of easy these days.
Yeah.
I think if you explicitly ask for it, sure. Like in all of my experimentation and working with developers, it's pretty clear that if, you're not prompting your model in a way that is requiring it to build whatever piece of code for you securely, it's not going to do it. I think we've all sort of seen that, right? Like, I need you to generate this, it generates it. And then you say, okay, now can you do it securely? And it changes the code and it says, oh yeah, security, right. And then it just rewrites it for you. And then I've even had cases where you have to ask it then 2 or 3 more times, even pointing out specific things that need to be secured before it comes up with, something that is secure. It's like it knew the answers the whole time. It's just you didn't ask for it, so it didn't give it to you. Um, so I don't think we see the models giving you secure code out of the box today, but I do think that we'll get there. A few things that I want to bring up as well on this topic is I do think it's important architecturally to think about security up front, right? Because architectural type issues are very difficult to undo or change down the line. But when it comes to actually sitting down and coding, especially like I brought up a minute ago, if you're in the state of, prototyping, just make this work, right? We've all heard premature optimization is the root of all evil. I don't think you should necessarily be thinking about security when you're just trying to get it working, right? But where I think people go wrong is now that it is working, you don't ship it quite yet. Like you got it working. That's sort of the first step. Now you go back and make sure, like I was saying before, it's maintainable, it's readable, it's performant, it is secure, right? So there's some due diligence that has to happen after you make it work.
Yeah, when I implemented the parenting tool, I used Supabase, which is a database pass solution, really cool solution that I think it's going to be the future of database data management solutions. But I think what I really liked about the tool that I used to kick off the project, I won't name the tool that I used. The backend was Supabase, but I used another AI tool to test for my personal project. Um, to kick off the project, and that tool has integration with Supabase. And the AI, the AI agent of that tool created a bunch of tables for my data model. I gave the general principle of the data that I wanted to have. I wanted to have a parent table, a child table, a school table, et cetera, et cetera. What is the relationship between them and so on. And then it implemented that. And then I asked, okay, now let's make sure we have a user integration system with Google and have user-based control of the data. What it did basically was implemented row-level security. And that is by default actually on Supabase. And for many years, I never thought about row-level security because I mean I haven't coded production systems per se for the past 15 years, working as a PM now, well, 13 years. So back in the days, we implemented systems with roles, role-based control, and you have those database global users, global accounts. You go to your database driver configuration in your system and you just put one single user. And then everything else is controlled by actually the middleware. The middleware would have that control, not the database. But Supabase with Postgres implements row-level security at the database level, which is very, very interesting. The implementation, which by the way, can be done in any other database, but the way that they implemented it with Postgres is really, really good because once I authenticate with my Google user, it sets an authentication ID into the context of the database connection with the database for that session. And that filters all data from every table based on the user ID, which is a column that almost every table has in them. So the the database is protected regardless of the middleware, regardless of what backend code exists. And the authentication ID has to be present in the session for the data to be collected from that table. So you see that the AI platform, the AI tool with Supabase combined implemented some blueprints that have that security by default and that architecture, that security architecture implemented for the end user without them having to know about it. So that is a sort of guardrail that is really important for AI tools to have so that users that have less experience or no experience at all, they don't have to worry about that. And that is what makes these platforms kind of interesting for non-coders or even for coders that don't have that experience. So I really like this approach, these blueprints that leverage the technology that they are using behind the scenes and set the stage for having that security, that secure by default design.
I think that's a great example. And what I would like to see is that more tools and solutions and models take security into account by default, right? Without, like I was saying before, having to explicitly ask for it. I do think we're going to get there. A lot of what I was saying is just around the state of where we are today, right? you prompt a model to get a result, and a lot of times it just does not take security into account. But it's good to know, right, that there are tools that are making progress here. And I think we will get there. I think in 5 years, it's going to look a lot different. I think we're going to make a lot of strides toward really ensuring the quality of the code that's produced, which will then in turn, which is what I would love to see, allow people to just not have to worry about it as much. I think there's an entire right brain sort of creative process here. You know, you as a product manager know all about this as well. Like there is certainly a lot of value in sort of abstracting away the details and letting you create. You know, I want an app that does this. And if a lot of the heavy lifting is done by a tool, I really think that is where we're headed. And I think that is a wonderful thing. You know, I think there will always be specialists who really do care about the actual code, right, that's produced. But I do think the majority of people just want to create something. You know, you've got entrepreneurs, you've got product folks who are just, you know, they're trying to really draw out what's going to be useful for the end customer. And that's really what they want to focus on, not necessarily all of the details. So I'm looking forward to the day where we can trust the models a little bit more.
So, Dustin, I love your comment, and I'm laughing because I know Bruno's got a good story about this, about someone who just wanted to create. So I'm gonna let Bruno dive into that in a moment, and talk about why security is needed in some of these things, because we're just not there yet. But we do have a question in the Q&A, and I want to make sure we get to it. So what sort of prompts do you suggest using to ensure the generated code is secure? Before making a commit, I often say something like review the security of the new code and make sure it's production ready. Do you suggest a specific prompt be added to the instruction file?
This is a good question. I do think it's based on the context. I think the more you know in terms of the fundamentals around, let's just say OWASP top 10, right? Input validation, broken authentication, right? All of these types of issues. If you can ask for it, especially based on what you're trying to build, to look for specific things, the better, right? The more specific you can get, the better. However, and I was going to bring this up earlier that you can get this advice, like that exact question that you just asked, you can ask your model, you know, what sorts of things do you suggest I look at when it comes to the security of the code that I just wrote? And it'll tell you. You should look for input validation. You're handling user data, so you should look for this. You should look for that. You should look for that. So that's a good way, and it's sort of this prompting technique, right? To um, explore this stuff one step at a time, because then what you could do is based on the result that the model gave you, you can turn around and have it apply those things. You know, certainly there are questions why it didn't do that to begin with, which is what we were just talking about. But it's like the model knows about this stuff, right? Based on the data that it was trained on. So hopefully that helps. Like I would definitely lean into utilizing the model itself to come up with the right answer to that question.
Yeah, I agree with you, Dustin. I think using the LLM itself to ask the question, what questions can I ask, is a good thing. It's a good starting point. My concern with security in general with software, and this is regardless of using AI or not, to understand how data flows in a software, looking at the source code is not always sufficient. You have to look how the data is flowing during the execution of the software. And AI LLMs cannot still see what a software is doing because they don't look at the production, at the software running. They look at the source code of the software, which is a bunch of files. So for AI to understand, to have the context of how the data is flowing, looking at the source code is not sufficient. For us developers to understand how the data is flowing, it takes a lot of experience and effort and brain stamina to look at the source code and understand how that data will flow throughout the software and how security is being checked on every step of that data flow. LLMs cannot do that because they don't have a brain. They have infinite stamina. As long as you have GPUs powered on, you have infinite stamina, but they don't have a brain. All they can do is identify patterns. And they do that by looking at individual files, right? And they look at this file, and then they see that this file references this file, and then this file references that file, and then they will go on and so forth, finding the patterns. But because the software is not running, they cannot see that data flow. So when you look at how Log4j issue happened years ago, 5 years ago, nearly 5 years ago now, I don't think analyzing the source code with static analysis tools would have highlighted the security issue that that Log4Shell had at the time. And in fact, I mean, how many security tools existed at that time? A lot. Did any of them see the issue with Log4j source code? No, because it was a feature. It was an actual feature designed with good intentions that eventually somebody with brain and a lot of stamina realized how the data was flowing and where it was flowing to, that eventually could be executed, and therefore it could be exploited, right? So that data flow requires still humans to see, unless we think about building tools that will run the software and expose how the data is flowing, and then the LLM can look into that. Sure, maybe. So for developers to and end users to ensure security, they have to have that experience today, or somebody has to look into that particular way. So going to the parenting tool that I saw somebody building, the way that they implemented security was by principle, by looking at the code, it was okay. It had a username and password field. It had a UI that filtered the data only to the one associated with that logged in user. So looking at the source code, the LLM would say, yes, this application is secure. It has username, it has password, it filters the data. Sounds good. What the LLM was not looking at was that the JSON file with all the data was actually exposed on the server. And the LLM was not seeing that, was just not, yeah, that's the data file. But they didn't see that, the LLM didn't see that that would be exposed through the web server, because it didn't have access to the web server configuration. It didn't have access to the production environment. So it couldn't see the data flow during production time. So how can we ensure security when the LLM cannot see the full architecture of your software, right? Looking at development time is not enough. You have to look at production environment. How this software will run in production is of utmost importance to ensure security, right? And a lot of developers are working on their little projects, little folder inside their computers. Once they push that to production, you have Nginx in front, you have Apache in front, you have Redis cache in front. Yeah. Is Redis protected? Is an FTP server on that, is SSH enabled on that server with passwordless root authentication? So all these things, if they're not secured through additional checks, looking at the source code is not enough. So I think architecture is still the most important element of building software. It will remain the most important factor for many years. And AI is a shortcut to writing code. But ensuring security is still an architecture job, or an architect job. And LLMs are just good for writing the documentation for the architecture, but not for defining the architecture per se.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think I agree with everything you were saying, especially just don't turn your brain off. Like AI is not going to solve everything for you. It doesn't have the context that you do or experience, or it doesn't understand even what you're trying to accomplish at the end of the day, right? It's a co-pilot. It's not an autopilot, right? It's one of the best phrases to sort of describe that. which, it aligns very much with a lot of things that I typically go talk about, and that's the human in the loop. The human element here is still extremely important. Building a culture where developers do the due diligence that we've been talking about this entire time, and ensure that they realize the importance of paying attention to security and the quality of the output of the code. At the end of the day, it's your responsibility for what's ultimately produced. So I just want to make that very
Yep.
clear. Like Bruno, you and I, we're on the same page when it comes
Yep.
to that.
So we do have a question in the chat that's quite good. And here it is. I've recently been hearing the claim that there are no vibe coded apps that are successfully being used in production industry grade apps as a criticism of the trend. Do you think it's necessarily true? Would you qualify this based on whether it's a developer using AI versus someone who doesn't know code? My guess is even if someone's vibe coded a successful business, they wouldn't admit it because of the stigma surrounding the practice.
Well, I admit my app is completely 100% vibe coded.
Yeah.
I
You
mean,
might be a unicorn here, but yeah.
yeah. Well, I'm still waiting for that $1 million valuation, but sure.
Yeah.
A unicorn in the sense that the exception to the rule, maybe.
Right.
But um, here's the thing. When I built that app, by the way, if you want to check it out, it's kid schedule, but you cut short schedule and kidscad.com if you want to try it out. Um, it is a tool that I built again with Supabase as the back end, and the front end I used this AI platform for building front ends. But I only used that tool to kickstart the project. After I had a good application, I actually moved to Visual Studio Code and GitHub Copilot because I wanted to make sure the code made sense to me and I could maintain the code with and without AI. Also because I didn't want that particular AI platform to always be rethinking the whole thing. I wanted to be okay. Now I want to add this new feature. I don't want that AI tool to go and rebuild the whole thing. I wanted to just add this new feature, and that's where GitHub Copilot and VS Code come to rescue, and they do a good job with narrowing the scope of what you're asking for. Um, but but do we really want to admit or not? Doesn't really matter. For the end user of that system, it doesn't really matter if it was vibe coded or not. Here's a funny thing. JavaFX is this Java desktop UI library for building desktop applications in Java. How many applications of that do you see out there in the world? You don't, because they are internet applications most of the
Yeah.
time. They're not consumer applications. Electron won the race of consumer desktop applications, but JavaFX is heavily used, and Java Swing is actually still quite used internally at a bunch of companies in the world. You don't see that because they're not consumer, but it's an implementation detail as well. So does it really matter for the end user? And do you see that as an end user? Sometimes I look, I I remember the days of Oracle Forms and Delphi and all these and Microsoft Access, all these 4GL tools for building desktop applications back in the days. How many of those do you see out there in the market? You don't, because they're running inside companies. Nobody
Yeah.
cares about that. So I actually see the future where 4GL application frameworks will come back, but all with AI assisted capabilities. Because it's well narrow scope, it's well defined DSL, it's well defined capabilities and features. It's not wild west with React or front end frameworks. You're gonna see a lot of applications being built with AI for intranet internal purposes. And my assumption is that 90% will be vibe coded. And because it doesn't really matter, I mean, they don't have to scale. How many employees do you have? I mean, Microsoft has 200,000 employees. Compare that's a big company. Now compare
Yeah.
that with Netflix user base, right? Or compare that with Uber user base. That's millions of users. Do you really care about scalability and quality For internal users, you don't. You want the user experience to be good, but you don't care about scalability and performance in general because it doesn't have to. So vibe coded applications, I think they're going to explode mostly for internet and internal systems, and nobody will be bragging about that because they can't. It's internet application. Why? What's the point? And same thing happens with JavaFX applications, for example. So I don't see anybody being concerned because they just don't care.
All right, last question. We just got another good one. Very interesting points about the LLM needing to look at more than just the code, whole production environment. Do you see any decent tools coming out that address this context issues, i.e. full dev agents?
So there is a growing interest in building SRE agents or agents for reliability and production monitoring observability. So I think those agents eventually will or the idea of agents connected to production systems or being able to inspect production environments. I think that will grow. I don't know any particular tool that is capable of understanding data flow in production or scanning the whole production environment. I mean, what is production these days? Production is how much do you trust all the components interconnected in an environment that gives access to important users? That is definition of production to me, you know. So I don't know how or when this will happen that somebody will trust an AI agent to connect to a production environment, but I think it will happen eventually. And then once that happens, we'll be able to see that data flow exposed to LLMs, and then true AI will be able to understand not just the code, but the actual execution of the code and all the components interconnected as part of that system.
Great answer. So we have about 2 minutes left. I would love to just get your final thoughts. We've talked about a lot of different things today. So if you could share one piece of advice for those that have been with us on this past hour, what would your advice be when thinking about moving forward with vibe coding or agentic coding? What would be your one piece of advice and where to start? Dustin, how about you first?
Yeah, I'll go first. It's going to be similar to what I was talking about before. I think, don't take your hand off the wheel yet. Like we're not there yet. And certainly I'm not sure we're ever going to get there. So I would just encourage everyone who's considering vibe coding or currently vibe coding today, to consider the fact that you are and should be held accountable, and feel the responsibility of what's ultimately produced. If you use AI as a co-pilot, that's great. I don't see any issue with it. Again, I think that we've cheated more or less over the years to help us create high quality code, frankly. But it's always with the human being involved, right?
Yep.
Who has the full context, who knows the goals, et cetera. So make sure that you're feeling that accountability and responsibility for what you produce.
Bruno?
Yeah, I endorse what Dustin said. I think AI. I think any company batting that AI will replace software developers is making a huge mistake. First and foremost. Second thing is, right now AI is an amazing productivity tool, but productivity requires what's the word for it? To achieve productivity with AI, you have to be what Dustin said. You have to be hands-on. You have to remain in control. I mean that's why the whole point of Microsoft branding its AI solutions as co-pilot. We don't want the human being to just be replaced by AI. We want to augment that human being to achieve more as they work on whatever task that they have at hand. So it is really important that we developers remain in control of the software that we produce. Do we understand 100% of the code? I don't think anybody has ever understood 100% of the code of any software they wrote. I mean, at the end of the day, do I understand the hotspot JVM? I don't. You know,
Yeah.
do I understand the C compiler? God, I don't want to. Uh, at the end of the day, AI assisted coding is just another layer that augments our capacity as software builders to build greater things.
I couldn't have wrapped this conversation any better myself with the key takeaways both of you had. So, for those of you at home, thanks for tuning in with us, Bruno and Dustin. Thank you so much for taking the time to be here, explain some things to me and the folks at home. We will be releasing this out on YouTube and on demand, where you can check out the free resources where there's a little bit more information on vibe coding and things to be aware of. But till next time, third Tuesday of the month, we'll see you next month for Cybersecurity Month of October, and we'll be talking about licensing and getting a little bit into that. I know, very exciting and spooky. So stay tuned until next time, guys.
Thank you. Bye.
Thanks for having us.